As I mentioned at the start of the service, it's really good to be back with you all while Mark is on vacation. I was supposed to cover for him next Sunday as well, but unfortunately I have to go back this week for a funeral in the U.S. for a friend of mine. Honestly, I still can't really believe that she's gone. She was only 41 and died completely unexpectedly. And I especially can't imagine what it must be like for her parents. Losing a child has to be one of the most profound pains that anyone could face. Certainly, as the father of two daughters, I can't imagine anything worse that could happen in life. When faced with this type of really devastating loss, one's faith is put to the test. I give so much thanks that my friend's parents are two of the most genuine, committed Christians that I've ever met. In fact, their witness to Christ played a major role in my discernment about becoming an ordained minister. Without faith, I don't know how my friend's parents or anyone could survive something so devastating. Of course, that's not to say that faith makes everything sunshine and lollipops. The depth of their pain must be nearly infinite. But somehow, they're able to keep going, to keep putting one foot in front of the other, to keep meeting each day. And how can that be possible except by the grace of God? I think that's part of what Jesus is getting at in this evening's gospel, that nothing is possible except by the grace of God. The context for the passage is key. Jesus has just shown his grace by feeding 5,000 with only 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Now that the crowd has tasted something of this Jesus bread, so to speak, they don't want to lose it. So they tried to make Jesus king by force, the gospel says. Jesus and his disciples managed to slip away and go to the other side of the lake, but eventually the crowd tracks down Jesus there too. Martin Luther had a great description of this crowd. He said that it was full of uncouth and coarse people who were interested solely in eating and drinking. I bet it sounds even harsher in German. So, I meant to look it up, and I forgot to look it up in German. I'm going to. But Jesus, still this, uncouth and coarse people, it would be understandable, I think, if Jesus just said, bugger off, or if he tried to slip away again. But he doesn't do that this time. The text doesn't say why Jesus decided to stay and listen to the crowd, but I suspect that he's started to realize just how deep the hunger is in this crowd. The crowd might think that all they want is food that fills their bellies, but Jesus understands that they're actually hungering for something much, much more. They're hungering for something that doesn't just fill, but fulfills. We all do. We all hunger for something deeper because that's how God made us. God made us to long with every ounce or every gram of our being for something that's beyond, something that's more than anything. It's soon as the crowd starts to talk, though, it's clear that they're just confused. In fact, they've misunderstood just about everything, starting with who Jesus is. They think that Jesus should be an earthly king who fills their bellies whenever they want. So Jesus explains to them in a very Jesus sort of way that they shouldn't work for food that spoils, but for food that endures to eternal life which the Son of Man will give you. I think it's important to note that Jesus doesn't disregard or discount their physical hunger for bread. God always hears that call for bread, just like God did in Exodus when the people left Egypt and God gave them manna in the wilderness. But Jesus has given them that bread and teaches them now that the bread that they need, in addition to this physical bread that fills, is a bread that heals the soul. It's a bread that transforms the spirit. It's a bread that liberates the whole self from sin. And no king can provide that kind of bread. Nobody can, except Jesus, the Son of Man, the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Jesus can provide that sort of bread. And only Jesus can provide that sort of bread. But that certainly doesn't mean that there aren't plenty of others who claim they can fill our deep hunger. If I watch something on TV, I mostly just use streaming services where there are no commercials. But every now and then I'll watch regular TV, not quite back to rabbit ears, but still whatever's being broadcast. And the commercials, I love commercials. They can be really clever sometimes. But commercials reveal a lot about us and our modern sensibilities. Generally, it seems like there are about two, maybe more, but at least two ideologies that claim in commercials that they can satisfy our deepest hungers. One is, you could call it the market economy ideology. It's that notion that if you just get this thing, then you'll be satisfied. Just get this house or car or medication or a particular group of friends or membership in a certain club. Just get this thing and that deep hunger will be fulfilled. The other ideology tends to be grounded in colorful individual personalities. Somehow I've managed in the past year to live in Switzerland, Germany, and the United States during election seasons. I've gotten to experience, kind of the best and the worst of what those bring out in us. And regardless, I felt, of where one lives, political messages often are pretty similar. Just follow this leader. Just follow this leader and we'll be satisfied, and things will be okay, and that deep hunger will be filled and fulfilled. And we listen. We listen to these messages that say, just get this thing or just follow this person, because we're really not that different from the crowd. Or I'll just speak, at least I know I'm not. I suspect you all aren't either. As wonderful a group of people as this is, we have to acknowledge, I think, that many of us, perhaps all of us, are more like that crowd than we'd like to think. We want a king, whether it's a person or a thing that's going to give us this quick fix to satisfy our hunger. No, Jesus says. Jesus isn't that kind of king, which leads into the crowd's second big misunderstanding in this passage. See it when they ask, what must we do to do the works God requires? In Greek, the same word, work, is actually used twice. So literally, they ask something more like, what works does God require that we work? My goodness, I fall into this works trap like the crowd all the time. Of course, I don't believe in works righteousness, that notion that thankfully we threw in the garbage can at the Reformation about doing certain things to earn God's love and earn salvation. But too often I still find myself slipping into that thinking of, what do I need to do so I can feel satisfied and fulfilled? It becomes very almost selfish. Jesus says, nope, that's completely misunderstanding what God asks. There's just one thing that God asks. The work of God is this: to believe in the one he has sent. Believe is a very loaded term in John's gospel. In the modern world, we tend to limit belief to a kind of intellectual understanding. And we think we have a right to understand everything, really, if we want to. But in John's gospel, believe is more than a mental exercise of subscribing to a particular set of facts. It's entrusting oneself completely to someone or something else. For John, to believe in Christ is to completely trust Christ, completely give oneself over to Christ. I just noticed on a Reformation kick. So now, since I've cited Martin Luther to cite John Calvin, when asked to explain the Eucharist, Holy Communion, the Lord's Supper, he replied that he would rather experience it than explain it. That's the sort of belief that John describes. One that's not limited to what we think or what we in our minds understand about Jesus, but one in which we encounter Jesus, we experience Jesus, we feed on Jesus. By satisfying our deepest hungers and longings, this type of experiential belief transforms us into people who can't help but live out Jesus' mission of love. But the crowd keeps asking questions. Kind of reminds me of when my daughters were younger and you answer their question and then, but why? Crowd, I can picture Jesus just kind of shaking his head at the crowd as they ask for a sign. And they say, but our ancestors ate manna in the wilderness. As it is written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat. For a third time now, in this relatively short passage, their misunderstanding, it forms a barrier between them and experiencing Jesus. It prevents them from really believing. So Jesus does what I think we all should do when we're misunderstanding things. He does a little Bible study with them. First, he points out that it wasn't Moses who gave the bread, like they just claimed. It was God. The passage in Exodus that they're citing is pretty clear about that. And the verse in particular, where it talks about the giving of the bread, uses a present tense verb, both in Hebrew and then the later Greek version. It's not that God gave bread, like the crowd has just said, but that God gives bread. God gives you the true bread from heaven, Jesus tells them. Finally, that truth of Jesus is starting to sink in. And the crowd responds in this almost prayer-like way, "Sir, give us this bread always." We'll never fully understand. But if we can join the crowd in letting go of some of our misunderstandings, if we can let go of some of our control needs and turn to Jesus without any sort of expectation or hope or want for anything except the bread that only Jesus can give, then our deepest longings, they really will be satisfied, because that's what Jesus promises us. And God is faithful to those promises. The start of this walk with Jesus can happen for many people in an instant. But that journey of transformation, of having this hunger satisfied, it's a gradual process. It takes a lifetime. God doesn't promise that this road, once we come to Christ, that it's always going to be smooth. But God does promise to never abandon us, especially in times of profound loss, which happen far too often in this broken and sinful world. Jesus stays there with us. Jesus doesn't slide away again. Jesus stays there with us, offering us this bread that endures so that we'll have the strength. Sometimes it's just the strength to keep going. Sometimes it's the strength to just keep moving through the darkness, even if only barely, until we arrive on that joyous day and the light of God's kingdom manifest on earth as it is in heaven. Thanks be to God.